I've known Don personally since I was young at College Hill. Many years ago, I knew Don and Karen. He graduated from Harding in 1983 and married Donna from Alabama in August. They have 3 children. He is doing doctrinal studies at the University of Minnesota. Okay. Joshua is doing doctoral studies. Jessica is a supervisor at Mastech, and Jennifer is a manager at a restaurant and doing master's studies at ACU. Don has been involved in youth ministry. He was a youth minister at the Westbury congregation here in Fort Worth for, I believe, 6.5 years or so. Knew many of our current members, Sharon Pippin, the Bowers family, the Musselmans, and several others that were members there. He's been preaching full and time for 27 years and has most recently been preaching like our brother Paul, the apostle. He is working full-time in a secular job, but yet he's still preaching for the Aspermont Church of Christ since about 2013, as he calls it, a rent-a-preacher. And so he's continuing to do the work with us here tonight, and so we're very fortunate to have him here with us. Don?
Howdy. Good to see you. Good to be with you. My good friend Bob Marco asked me, hey, would you come fill in for me for a couple of weeks at Aspermont? I'm going to go on vacation up to Oklahoma on vacation, so if you just fill in for me for a couple of weeks, and then he never came back. That was about 8 years ago, maybe 9 years ago, something like that. So those people have been really nice to me while I'm filling in for Bob. Bob was a great guy, but he passed away. That's one of the reasons why he never came back, I guess. He can get by with that, and that's about it, though, right? So I wanted to talk to you about, let's see if it'll come on now. There we go, pestilence in the 2020s, or I remember the Rona. You know, the thing is, it had such an effect on us, and we didn't have a lot of choice sometimes. You know what I mean? I don't mean just that it happened to us, but I mean everything kind of happened to us. You know, we were just there for the ride, as it turns out, for a lot of that. But I asked my church last Wednesday night, or last Sunday morning, I asked them, tell me, how did you feel? What happened with Corona? And you know, the very first thing that came up was resources. And that's because they're very rural. You know, we have in our whole county there, Stonewall County, where Aspermont is, 1,400 people in the county. 1,100 people in the town. Oh, thanks, man. You're such a good guy. So it's a small town. And they think it's about 800. It might be 800, but Wikipedia said 1,100, so I'll go with that number for right now. But not many people. Am I out of the screen there? Sorry. So about 1,100 people, and very rural. You might not have a neighbor for 1 or 2 miles, you know, at least. And then unless you live in town, and then you've got, you know, little neighborhoods. And this was a kind of a bustling, booming city a long time ago. And it used to rain in Aspermont. That was about 50 years ago, I think. And it just hardly rains there now. They get less rain than we get in Abilene. We get less rain than you get in Fort Worth, about 10 inches less a year in Abilene than you get right here. So their resources were affected by COVID. They couldn't sell the same things as easily or buy them as easily. They couldn't raise, you know, things as well. It was just hard to get everything for them. And of course, they are in a rural and an urban setting, and that's rather than an urban setting, which is a huge deal for them as they go along. Their awareness, they became completely aware of touch, as did you, right? Do you remember how often you washed your hands if you went outside in public at all? I went out in public a lot, never thought a whole lot about things. I wore a mask. Did you wear a mask? Raise your hand if you wore a mask. That's good. You wore a mask, and so I wore a mask everywhere. Not so much for myself as I was concerned for my dad, who was living with us. He came to live with us, and I certainly didn't want to bring home anything for him to have to deal with. So I wore a mask all the time. I washed my hands a lot. You wash your hands a lot too. Everything you touched, you wondered who else has touched this? What person touched this last? Of course, there was no such thing as going to a buffet. We still had a few restaurants that were open around town, but there was nothing much, and you had to mostly take everything out. It was amazing to go to say Olive Garden and get to go. Whoever gets to go food at Olive Garden, for goodness sake. Any other medical issue you had besides COVID, unless it was emergent, it was going to be put off. You just didn't get anything else done. And this is what this is the kind of things they talked about. And then church. We stopped having church services, but that only lasted about 5 or 6 weeks because they couldn't stand it. So we started meeting again, and I took masks up there so that anybody could get a mask. And so we continued to meet. Because they don't see people very often and because they have little contact, COVID didn't really come to Aspermont until very, very late in the game. And at our church, I think 2 people, probably 2 people had COVID. Well, 3 if you count my wife. So Donna had COVID and Ivy had COVID, or was it Kay? Both of them. And then didn't Carolyn Holland also have COVID? This is my wife, Donna. You'd feel a lot better if you were watching her instead of me. I know that. But that's the way COVID affected that church. I want to tell you about Sarah Isabella Garcia. She's a little baby. She's about 6 weeks old, 4 weeks or 6 weeks old, somewhere in that area. And she was born with trisomy 13. So there are 3 kinds of trisomy. There's trisomy 13 and trisomy 18 and trisomy 21, which we commonly call Down syndrome. But trisomy 18 and trisomy 13 are much, much more fatal diseases. And rarely does a child live past its first week with trisomy 13. And so here this baby is 4 weeks, 6 weeks old and struggles for every single breath that she breathes. This is a young couple at our church. They have another daughter, maybe she's 5 years old, Evelyn. And Evelyn is a great big sister with her little struggling Sarah Isabella. And so Oscar called me the other day, said, would you come pray over Sarah and talk to us for a while? So we went to visit with Oscar and Jimena. And most parents in those circumstances would have this faith-shaking question: why is this happening to us? Why is this happening to my baby? Why is this happening to me? That's a tough question. And how do you answer that question when you go talk to someone and they're dealing with something that's just life-shattering? How do you talk about faith with that person? Because there is no answer to that question. We live in a fallen world and things happen. The only answer for that is faith. That's not their question. I was so impressed and surprised because their question was completely different. The question was, we are so blessed to have this little child and to be her caretakers. But she's struggling. And here's their question: when will God and how will God bring this to a conclusion? We would like you to pray that our daughter would either be healed or that she will be taken home because she is suffering. Yeah, I appreciate that. What wonderful thoughts from that young couple. Because if we think about COVID and all that actually happened with COVID, I don't want you to think about the beginnings of COVID and what we thought and what we were told and what we acted upon. I want you to think now in retrospect about COVID, and you see how unimportant it really is compared to little Sarah Isabella Garcia. And I don't want to diminish COVID. That's not my point. People got sick and people died from COVID. I know some of those people. And I have a friend right now, a good friend, who has long COVID. Everywhere he goes, when he sits down, he can be there for about 20 minutes and then all of a sudden he's going to start coughing. And he's going to cough and cough and cough and cough and cough. He can't stop. He drinks to help not to cough. You know, I'm just saying, I'm not diminishing COVID when I talk like this. And as I continue to talk about COVID, you might get the impression that I am, but I am not diminishing it. It hurt people. Oh, some years ago, I had a conversation with my neighbor who preached at the Highland Church of Christ at that time. His name was Jonathan Stormont, and one of the things that we talked about was what you can lose. I can lose my health. I'm so blessed. God has blessed me with good health for so long. But I'm getting older and things change and you don't know what way they're going to change, right? I can lose my health. I could lose my good looks. No, but that's serious. I don't mean good looks part, but you can lose that. You can be disfigured, right? You could lose everything that you own. You can lose the money, the house. You can lose everything. And it can happen to you in a surprise. You know what I mean? Things happen that you don't ever anticipate. You could lose your house. You could lose your property. You could lose your bank account. You could even lose your good name. Even if you are a good person, you can lose your good name. Less likely, but still it happens. You could lose your family. We just talked about a lot of stuff that day. But you know what you cannot lose? And I'm saying this because I want you to think about what is most important. You cannot lose that you are a child of God. I mean, I suppose you could forsake that, but I'm just saying it can't be taken from you. You're a child of God. Is there anything else more important, bigger, something that you should pay more attention to, something that you should give yourself more to than that one thing that you cannot lose? Isn't that awesome? I mean, wonderful. Now, those two stories, Sarah, Isabella, and the idea that you cannot lose that you're a child of God, those are to help us focus for a moment, because that's what COVID taught me. COVID taught me about God and about me and about the church how, hopefully, I say hopefully because we lose focus sometimes, don't we? What is most important? What is most important? And that I should be thinking about that it should be guiding me. I mean, I realized something. Jesus walked through a crowd of contagious people and stopped to touch them. Some of them with diseases that would kill you. disfigure you, take away your ability to be with other people. And he did it all the time. It was a regular part of his life. In one sense, you could say he walked through the pandemic of the world, that is, life on this planet. But that's Sarah Isabella. So I asked my church also, what's most important? And they said, God, because we're a church, right? If I was asking any other crowd, they might not say God, at least not right off the bat. They might come to it, but we're a church of people, and so the very first thing out of our mouths was God. And we think of the Shema, Hear, O Israel, the Lord thy God is one God. Love the Lord thy God with all your heart, all thy soul, all thy strength, all thy mind. Well, actually, it leaves out soul in there. So we believe that. Most important is God. And second, the second command is like unto it, says Jesus, right? Love your neighbor as yourself. Love your neighbor as yourself. Our neighbors, and who's our neighbor? Well, then he tells us who our neighbor is. It's people who are not like us, people who don't have necessarily the same beliefs as us. They're the people who need us. That's who our neighbor is, anyone who needs us. And Jesus said, and we believe, that those are the most important things. Well, the assembly, all right? Don't give up getting together with your brothers and sisters, as some are in the habit of doing, it says in Hebrews. But look forward to it and get together with each other. And that was an important thing. Now, you see how COVID's starting to affect us in that list? I heard a speaker one time say, you can't love God in a vacuum. Sit down in a room by yourself in a chair and say, I love God. How do you express your love for God? You love God by keeping the second commandment. At least that's a big part of how you love God. You love God by being with people and doing for people the things that God did for people, does for people. By assembling together with one another and encouraging each other. Well, most important is also family and friends. But you know what that reminds me of? Even the pagans love those who love them. So we're getting further and further afield, you see what I mean, from our religious stuff and getting more into our, kind of our personal stuff. Well, prayer and praise, they said, is important. And I appreciated that. Love and happiness is important. Our job is important. All those things are important. None of them are unimportant. I'm just asking us to think about those things in relationship to the things that can be taken away versus the thing that cannot be taken away. And in relation to little Sarah Isabella Garcia. I even hate to mention her tonight because I don't want to be taking advantages of her situation. But God will either heal her or she'll be taken. I think that's the last slide for a while. Now, I can't see your clock very well. What time am I supposed to finish? 8 o'clock. So that's just an hour from now. I'm sorry. I say I can't see the clock, didn't I say that? There was this article in the Washington Post in April the 8th, 2004, I believe it was. And this guy named Gene Weingarten had written an article called Pearls Before Breakfast. And you may have heard of this article because it was all over the place after it happened. A man named Joshua Bell. Joshua Bell, you might know who he is. And he's a great violinist, one of the best violinists in the world. And so his parents enrolled him to learn the violin because when he was just a little bitty thing at 4 years of age, he took rubber bands and wrapped it around a drawer so he could play classical music. He would change the pitch of the rubber band by sliding the drawer in and out. and play different songs on his rubber band. So his parents thought, well, let's give him violin lessons. And he has become one of the world's greatest violin players. So he accepted an invitation to play for about 45 minutes at the Plaza of the L'Enfant. That's a subway terminal in Washington, D.C., early one January morning, as though he were a street musician. So he shows up, takes his very expensive violin out, puts the case on the ground so that people can put money in it, and begins to play. And almost no one noticed. So they've got cameras everywhere recording all this so they can see everything that happens. When people walked by, they had interviewers, people who would stop the people after they walked by and say, did you notice? And they would take notes, and they stopped everyone that would stop and interviewed them about this. One man stopped to listen for about 3 minutes. That's all the time he had available. One woman paused. She put $1 in the violin case. Altogether, he collected $32 plus change. A worker at one of the pastry shops leaned out of the pastry shops to listen to him. Another listened for 9 minutes, but no crowd gathered. No crowd. He said the most uncomfortable thing was the lack of applause. Not because there was no way to segue to the next song. There was nothing. It was just silence. And nobody noticed either the silence or the music. Well, I say nobody, that's an overstatement, but it's almost universally true. 8 o'clock in the morning at a subway terminal in Washington, D.C., people have got more important things to do. They've got priorities in their life. Children would hear the music. Almost every child tried to stop so they could listen. But their parents were pulling them along because they've got to get somewhere. They've got to go somewhere. In a 2003 book named Timeless Beauty, British author John Lane writes about our loss of appreciation for beauty in the modern world. He just simply says it's about people having the wrong priorities. Now, I don't know if I agree with that or not, because normally if I would go to, a terminal of some sort, I'm in a hurry to get somewhere. I don't go there to hang out. I don't go there because I've got plenty of time on my hands. I can understand. So I don't know if I could agree entirely with everything about that, but it does seem amazing that one of the best violinists in the world would be playing and nobody would notice. And I want to compare that to Jesus' life for just a moment, because Jesus' life was a performance that you would never get to see again. He was a maestro. His life was so out of context that John chapter 1 tells us when the light shined into the darkness did not understand it. Like a maestro playing his violin in a crowded subway. What might Jesus have done in that subway plaza? I mean, all those people rushing here and there. What might Jesus have done? I can imagine kind of like Solomon's porch, where Jesus went and he talked to a man who is lying on a mat, and the first question Jesus asked him is, do you want to get well? And the guy starts offering excuses as to why he's not well. But I can imagine Jesus doing that same kind of thing in a crowded subway. Somebody's life would be changed. There was one man named John Piccarello, a small man who recognized the artistic beauty of what Josh Bell was doing. And he stopped, but he wandered a distance away because he didn't want to encroach on this space. And isn't that the way sometimes we see Jesus? If we get too close, it's kind of hard. And so at a distance, we watch his life. Jesus calls us to live that life, even in the midst of pandemic, to be his hands and feet in this world, even when it threatens us, as it threatened him, to be like him. So I just want to mention a few times when people said, yes, Lord. Canaanite woman whose daughter was dying, and she's begging Jesus to heal that child. I held little Sarah Isabella in my arms, and I begged God to heal her. Will He? I don't know. But she will be blessed. She will be blessed. This woman said, please, and Jesus said, I was sent to the lost children of Israel. I can't give the dogs what I came to give the lost children of Israel. And she said, well, even the dogs get to eat crumbs. She said, before that, yes, Lord. I just can hardly believe that to that statement, she said, yes, Lord. Jesus said, you're like a dog. And she said, yes, Lord, but can I have a crumb? And I think it's so important that we have the priority that says, my daughter, my neighbor, my soul is more important than my pride. Yes, Lord. Or how about this one? Jesus goes to the home of Mary and Martha is fussing. Jesus, if you'd been here sooner, if you'd just gotten here a little bit sooner, then Lazarus would not have died. And Jesus says, I am the resurrection and the life. Do you believe this? And you know what she said? Yes, Lord. It's a good practice to say yes, Lord, to Jesus. It's just a really good practice to say yes, Lord. Peter had left his discipleship or his apostleship, and he had gone out fishing again, you remember? And in John 21, he's been fishing, and he has this huge catch of fish. And Jesus said, Simon, son of John, do you love me more than you love this huge catch of fish that you have here? And Peter said, yes, Lord. And you know what happened. I mean, Peter re-accepted his role. And then Peter died on a cross upside down because he said, yes, Lord. In Isaiah 26, I'm going to read this to you. This clear statement for the place that God's Word ought to have in our life. It says, trust in the Lord forever, for the Lord is the rock eternal. He humbles those who dwell on high. He lays the lofty city low. He levels it to the ground and casts it to the dust. Feet trample it down, the feet of the oppressed, the footsteps of the poor. The path of the righteous is level. O upright one, you make the way of the righteous smooth. Yes, Lord. Walking in the way of your laws, we wait for you. Your name and renown are the desires of our heart. You see, saying, yes, Lord, gives us the right priority. Your desire and your name, your renown is the desire of my heart. Yes, Lord. Isn't that cool? Don't you kind of move into that? So when you talk about COVID, all of a sudden, in retrospect, it gets a little bit irrelevant, doesn't it? I mean, I know it was deadly, and it's not irrelevant. But there's one thing that is important. One thing. Say, yes, Lord. Why don't you say that with me? Yes, Lord. Let's try it again. Yes, Lord. Would you say, yes, Lord, and make that our priority? Well, I was supposed to look at Psalm, and I didn't really realize that while I was getting ready for tonight. So I did look at a good psalm I think that you'll like with me. Psalm 25. I just want you to see how David says, yes, Lord. Doesn't have those words in here, but he says, yes, Lord, over and over. In you, Lord, my God, I put my trust. I trust in you. Do not let me be put to shame, nor let my enemies triumph over me. No one who hopes in you will ever be put to shame. But shame will come on those who are treacherous without cause. Show me your ways, Lord. Teach me your paths. Guide me in your truth and teach me. You are my God, my Savior. My hope is in you all day long. Remember, Lord, your great mercy and love, for they are from of old. Do not remember the sins of my youth and my rebellious ways. According to your love, remember me. For you, Lord, are good. Good and upright is the Lord. Therefore, he instructs sinners in his ways. He guides the humble in what is right and teaches them his way. All the ways of the Lord are loving and faithful toward those who keep the demands of his covenant. For the sake of your name, Lord, forgive my iniquity, though it is great. Who then are those who fear the Lord? He will instruct them in the ways they should choose. They will spend their days in prosperity, and their descendants will inherit the land. The Lord confides in those who fear him. He makes his covenant known to them. My eyes are ever on the Lord, for only he will release my feet from the snare. Turn to me and be gracious to me, for I am lonely and afflicted. Relieve the troubles of my heart and free me from my anguish. Look on my affliction and my distress and take away all my sins. See how numerous are my enemies, how fiercely they hate me. Guard my life and rescue me. Do not let me be put to shame, for I take refuge in you. May integrity and uprightness protect me, because my hope, Lord, is in you. Deliver Israel, O God, from all their troubles. David just says, yes, Lord, over and over and over again. And so do we. And sometimes we say, yes, Lord, as forthrightly as that. But sometimes we say, yes, Lord, because we go visit that neighbor who has been so difficult to live with, but they need something. And we go to their house and we say, hey, can I help you with this? Or we take them a casserole and we say, hey, we're thinking about you. Or we fix their lawnmower. Or we mow their lawn. We go to the hospital and we visit people who are sick. My Oscar and Hermina said, please tell the church to come and see Isabella. We can't get her out, but come see Isabella. And they can hold her. We miss the church. So Sunday morning, I said, let's go visit. And they all did. And not one of them wanted to, just of themselves, but they wanted to serve Oscar and Hermina and that little baby. Of themselves, they said, that's just not who I am. I can't tell you how many people said that. That's just not who I am. I don't do good at this. But they did great because they said, yes, Lord. And that was the priority. The most important thing. We must make the most important thing the most important thing. If you have any needs this evening, you're invited to come right now while we stand and while we sing.